Greetings everyone, and today I'm testing out quite a popular full-frame telephoto zoom lens for Sony's E-mount mirrorless cameras, the Sony FE 70-200mm f4 G OSS. It's about £1,100 in the UK or $1,300 US. Now, 70-200mm f4 lenses are quite enjoyable to use. The best way to think of them is as a smaller, less expensive version of the staple 70-200mm f2.8 lenses. f4 is not a bright maximum aperture, but it's a nice little improvement over less expensive telephoto zoom lenses, meaning that your aperture is just about bright enough for some casual sports photography and for getting nicely out of focus backgrounds, particularly if you're shooting on full frame. 200mm is not a terribly long focal length though. You'll want a bit more than that for wildlife photography. On an APS-C camera, it's the full frame equivalent of 105 to 300mm, also useful, a bit more telephoto. Well, let's check out its build quality first, and anyone who's used Canon's telephoto L lenses will feel right at home here. The lens's build quality is tough and metallic, weighing in at 840 grams or just under 2 pounds. The lens does not have a weather sealing gasket around the rear mount. That's a puzzling omission. But it does come with an adjustable tripod collar and all kinds of focus and image stabilization controls on the side. Let's take a look at the lens's image stabilization in action. Here it is turned off and now turned on to mode 1, which allows for horizontal panning, and now mode 2, which stabilizes the horizontal axis as well. So most of the time you should use mode 2. It's not the most effective image stabilization I've ever seen, but at least it's helping. Next comes the zoom ring, which turns smoothly, but with a little whooshing sound. And at the front, we see the manual focus ring, which connects with the focus motor in manual focus mode, and works quite responsively. As you change focus, the lens exhibits a little focus breathing, zooming in a bit as you focus more closely. The lens's autofocus motor is accurate, silent, and works averagely quickly. The lens comes with a nice black bag and also a generously sized hood. Its filter thread size is 72mm. Overall, the build quality is great. It looks like it's built to last. The image stabilization on Canon's equivalent lenses is better, though. Anyway, let's move on and look at image quality now. First, we'll test it on a full frame camera, a 42MP Sony a7R II, with in-camera corrections turned on. At the widest angle of 70mm and f4, in the middle of the image, we see pin-sharp image quality with excellent contrast, and the corners also razor sharp. Nice. f5.6 sees a lot more brightness in the corners, and f8 sees a tiny extra boost in contrast. Despite the effect of diffraction, f11 and even f16 still look brilliant. Well, let's zoom in halfway to 135mm. Straight from f4, the middle of the image is similarly amazing, and the corners very good indeed. f5.6 looks about the same, but f8 sees a tiny bit of extra sharpness. Finally, let's zoom all the way into 200mm. In the middle of the image, at f4, sharpness isn't quite as brilliant as it was at wider angles, but it's still good. The corners are somewhat soft now. f5.6 is about the same in the corners, but the middle is punchier now. f8 is just a tiny bit better in the middle. The corners are still a little weak at f8, but stop down to f11, and we finally see some decent sharpness there. Well, overall, on full frame, it was an explosive start for the lens at wider angles, but the telephoto end of the zoom range left me feeling slightly deflated. Still, it's very sharp in the middle there, admittedly, and suitable for portrait photography. Alright then, let's see how it performs on APS-C by mounting it onto my Sony a5100 with its 24MP APS-C sensor. At 70mm and f4, the middle of the image is sharp, but contrast is very slightly ghostly. The corners look great though, and at f5.6 we see a nice dose of extra contrast in those corners and also back in the middle. The lens stays this sharp down to f8 and f11, although on the APS-C camera, if you stop down as far as f16, you will see a little softness due to diffraction. Now, somehow I managed to forget to test the middle of the zoom range on APS-C, sorry about that, so let's zoom all the way into 200mm. Thankfully here, the middle of the image remains pretty sharp, even at f4, although contrast again is just a little lower than usual. The corners are a bit blurry here though, but at f5.6 they look much sharper, and image quality in the middle is back up to being excellent again. Nice. The whole image frame stays this sharp down to f11. So there you have it, a simple result. On APS-C cameras, the image quality is very good at f4 and excellent from f5.6. Okay, let's look at distortion and vignetting now on a full frame camera. These are normally corrected automatically by your camera, but let's turn that off and see the raw results. At 70mm we see just negligible barrel distortion and the corners are just slightly dark, but stop down to f5.6 and they brighten up again. Zoom into 200mm and we see some quite clear pincushion distortion, but not too much vignetting. Again, stop down to f5.6 to see those corners fully brightened up. So it's a good performance for vignetting, but not perfect for distortion. This lens can focus as closely as 1.5 meters to your subject, so not particularly close. Here's the close-up image quality at f4. As you can see, it's still nice and sharp, thankfully. Now let's see how well the lens works against bright light. It's just an average performance here. Whether you're zoomed in or zoomed out, you'll see some flaring and glaring and just a little loss of contrast. Finally, bokeh. That maximum aperture of f4 can give you some nicely out of focus backgrounds when you're zoomed in enough. To me, the quality of those backgrounds is nice and attractive without any serious distractions or problems. Overall then, the Sony 70-200mm f4 G OSS is a really enjoyable lens to use. It's not the kind of lens I would personally buy. The maximum aperture of f4 isn't quite bright enough for my needs, and the focal range ending at 200mm not quite long enough. I also wish the image stabilization was a little more steady and that the price was just a little lower. But still, this lens is sharp with nice colours, contrast and bokeh and great build quality. It just gets you really nice pictures without any hassle, so it definitely comes recommended.